back in the woods.
Morning folks, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I just arrived back from SHOT Show in Las Vegas yesterday and I wanted to get back out in the woods. I received while I was gone the final rendition of the Pathfinder Scout Tarp, which is a tarp tent that's behind me set up in the background here. We used a lot of your improvements and a lot of your suggestions to make this thing better. I went back and forth with Peter a little bit at tentsmiths.com, and that's where this tarp is available from, is tentsmiths.com. And we looked at everything that you guys sent in for feedback, made the necessary changes that we thought would work out and still keep the cost down. Obviously American manufacturing is a little more expensive than doing things overseas, and Egyptian cotton oilcloth is one of the most expensive fabrics that you can make a tarp out of. So we wanted to keep the cost down as best that we could and still make the needed improvements from your suggestions on the video. So I came out today and I walked around my trap line a little bit. All of my traps have been sprung. I sprung all of my traps probably a month ago before I started doing some classes and some other things, and knew that I wouldn't have time to check them every single day like you need to run a trap line. So I went ahead and sprung all of them and left them in place. So I walked my trap line a little bit today, and there was actually a lot of activity with this fresh snow. There were fresh canine tracks in some of my sets that don't even have traps in them, you know, where the traps have been sprung, and there's really no fresh bait or urine or anything in that trap bed to attract a predator in there, and they're still coming up to those sets, probably from things that were set, you know, like I said, a month ago. So I'll probably go back out and reset some traps now that I've got some time off. I'm actually don't have anything planned in the very near future until March when we start classes up again. I do have a book coming out with a publishing company in New York that will be, the final manuscript is due at the end of February. I'm working on that right now. I've got about half of that done. It's due for release in June or July of 2014, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe August, just about in time for Outdoor Retailer Show. I'm working on some things with a television channel right now. I'll give you more details on that in the future as well. I'm going to do a program where I'm going to have total control of the production, total control of the edit, and total control of the content. And that's the only way I would have agreed to do TV again, was to do it in that format. And I have a channel that wants to give me that leeway now. So we are in talks with them right now, trying to figure out exactly what we're going to do to set that up and when we're going to start filming. But it will be similarly based to the things on my YouTube videos, but it will be on cable television. So I got this tent set up behind me. Let's talk through this, talk about your improvements, talk about things we did to make it better for you, and just have a look at it, because I think you're going to like it. I'm really, really impressed with it. Okay, so one of the things that I want to talk to you about first is, let's talk about the size. That was one of the things that we discussed, and was a lot of suggestions on making it bigger. So we started off with a 5 foot by 7 foot footprint for the tarp tent. Now we've went to 6 by 8. This thing is giant now. I mean, this thing is a Taj Mahal. You can stay in this thing 4 seasons, for a season at a time. No problem. There's a lot of room in here. But let's talk about the outside first. One of the improvements that we had gotten suggestions on was to put a flap on here so that you would have an overflap for stormproofing. So we did that. It now has 2 rows of toggles and a flap. You can see that this thing's laying on the ground. I don't even have it raised all the way up. I've got the doors flapped down on the ground a little bit. But I'll undo this real quick. And these toggles, I've got some improved loops on them now to make them easier on your hands. I like toggles. I hate Velcro and I hate snaps. All that stuff fails. One of these toggles fails, I can make another one very easily. So what we've done is we've got a row of toggles on the inside and a row of toggles on the outside, a row of loops, and a row of loops. So now you can overlap this thing, button it up from the inside and the outside, and you've got stormproofing. Let's open this thing up so you kind of see the inside. You can see inside there, this thing is huge. If I just squat down here, my head's not even hitting the peak. When I set this peak rope up to set this tent up, I set it up about nose level. So it's over 5 feet right now, or right about 5 feet. It's got some dip in the rope, so let's just call it right at 5 feet. Big on the inside. I've got 2 lashings on the outside we'll talk about in just a very few stakes. I'll show you those in just a minute. But I wanted you guys to see what this thing looked like set up, and we're going to walk around and talk about it a little bit more here in just a minute, so stay with me. Okay, so let's look at this thing from the outside. Again, We've got generous storm flapping here that goes across, and you can see this corner comes down, and that creates your double storm flap. It's got a toggle on the inside as well, so you can double flap that over. So there's no way anything's going to get inside there. On the outside, you can see it's got tie-out loops on both 3 areas here, 3 areas down the center, and then 3 areas on the other opposite seam. So you've got opportunity, and then as well it's got tie-outs over here. Again, this is a tarp tent, so it can be used as a tarp in a lot of different configurations, or a tent. This is just the main configuration of the setup itself. So I've got 2 pull lines. I've got one there, I got one there, and then I've got the main line going across here. And inside here, it has been reinforced on the inside, or here, so that you can put a 1 pole in there if you want to. It's actually got a pole pocket right there to put a 1 pole in if you want to. This is probably one of my most desirable setups for a long-term situation. If I were going to stay in this thing for a while, this is what I'd want. So let's get in here real quick and just show you. You can see I've got a half blanket laid down inside here, a half a wool blanket doubled over, okay? So there is at least 1.5 feet of room on that side, 1.5 feet of room on that side. And if I lay down on that blanket, basically that blanket's a little bit longer than I am, if I remember right. I'm going to get in there and lay down on it in a minute. But you can see there's a lot of footprint left inside underneath the shelter for gear and what have you. Once you get this thing dialed in, and I don't even have it dialed in yet, it's the first time I've ever set it up. So once you get this thing dialed in, I think this is probably going to be one of the best designs I've ever seen for a quickie trail tarp situation that you can set up into a closed-in tent configuration without a footprint on the floor, and you don't want that anyway. That's going to hold condensation, it's going to hold moisture. You're going to have to worry about putting something underneath it in case water runs under it. You don't want any of that stuff. This thing can be set up as a standalone tarp or a tarp tent, and that's the key to this design that Peter's come up with, and I think it's just fantastic. Okay, so looking at this thing from the inside, I've got a half blanket laid in here, and if I lay down in here, I've got my boots at one end of the blanket. The blanket's longer than I am. Now I've got at least a couple feet this way and a couple of feet that way, no problem. Over 1 foot anyway on both sides. I believe the footprint of this thing currently is 6 feet wide, 8 feet long. I'm about 5'8". So even if I was 6'8", I'd have plenty of room in here now, no problem. And there's a lot of room this way to put gear, to put work areas, things like that. I can close 1/2 of this thing off or open it all the way up if I want to work during the day. The advantage to something like this is that you can put a fire in front of it. And that was a big deal to a lot of the old-time woodsmen, because Nesmith wrote a story in one of his books. He talked about going out with a group of trampers from Pennsylvania, and they went to the Adirondacks, and they had camped in what he called a large, probably a wall tent, and they had a stove inside this tent, just a sheet metal stove, that, like the ones you use currently in wall tents. And what his complaint was is that you could stoke that stove up and go to sleep nice and toasty warm. 2 hours later you wake up with your teeth chattering because the stove has died down, and as he put it, you'd have to have a smoke and a nip, stoke the fire back up and go back to sleep, only to wake up a couple hours later in the same state again. Teeth chattering, cold, and in the morning when you wake up, same thing again. So what he liked to do was he liked to have an open front shanty of sorts, or some type of a tarp tent configuration that he would use, and he would use the self-feeding fire in front of it so that he could get that good 3 to 4 hours of sleep at a time. And even if he woke up a little bit chilly, he could just toss a couple logs on and go right back to sleep again. So that worked out well for him. And I think that this design bodes well for that. You could close it off if you wanted to. If the weather was fair and you weren't going to have any heat, you could close the thing off if it was going to storm or snow or whatever. If you had a good warm couple wool blankets in here, or a sleeping bag of some sort, like an military modular system, you'd be plenty warm without a fire. But if you want to put a fire in front of this thing, you can just open these flaps up and it works perfect for that. Now, one of the things that I want to show you guys that I think might be an improvement, let's talk about the weight and the size, because a lot of people worry about weight. I'm not too much of a big worrier about weight. I figure it's weight versus rate. What's it going to do for me You know, if it weighs a moderate amount, I don't care if it's going to do a lot for me, because I'm not going to carry a lot of gear to begin with. That's what bushcrafting is all about, in my opinion, is being able to carry the minimal amount of gear and craft the things in the bush or in the woods that you need to make it comfortable. So this is the bag that this tent comes in, and it comes in this bag from Tent Smiths, or this tent tarp I should say, that this tarp comes in from Tent Smiths. And it's made out of the same Egyptian cotton, but it's not oilcloth. So one of my suggestions to Peter is going to be, when he gets ready to start selling this thing, which I think is like now, he's ready to sell it as soon as I give him the high sign and say I love it, is that we make this out of oilcloth. And there's a couple advantages for that and reasons for that. First of all, this is a great browse bag. I can use this thing to stuff my bushcraft shirt in, or whatever the case may be, or my wool jacket or a shroud, and use this for a pillow. So that works out fantastic. I can walk around the woods and put browse in here, tinders and things like that. But if this was oilcloth, which would make it more water resistant or waterproof, and it had a couple of loops on it on the outside seams here, I'm okay with this drawstring. That's cool, because then I can even use it for a makeshift backpack if I needed to. But if I put a couple loops on here, I can also use it for a haversack. Now I could tie stones in there and do the same thing probably, but a couple of loops would make that a lot more convenient. And if it was made out of oilcloth, it would be more water resistant to use for a haversack walking around the woods when the tarp tent is out of it, because I'm not going to need this again until I take the tarp tent down, if I use this at all. It just helps protect the tarp tent. Now let's look at the size of this, because size and weight, like I said, are a big deal to some people. It only takes up about this much of this bag when you put it in here. And when I had it rolled up before I put it out, I kind of held it in my hand. I'm not very good at putting things on scales and getting exact weights and all of those things, but I'm pretty good at estimating things. And it felt to me like it was about the size and weight of a gallon of milk. So it was about this big around, and it was about this long, and then it was put inside this bag. It took up about that much room, and probably like that. So it's about the size of a gallon of milk, so I'm figuring it weighed about 8 pounds. So you got plenty of room inside this bag if you want to put ropes, stakes, die out lines, all those kind of things, and make that self-contained. You could do it all in here. With a couple loops on here, a Roycroft pack frame, you could almost make this a self-contained type sack that had a frame on it, and you could carry your shelter in that, and then you just have to, you know, hook your blanket or your sleep system or whatever to the bottom of that pack frame, and you'd be good to go. Same thing if you're using a metal type pack frame. So I think this bag could become a lot more versatile than it is, just by adding a couple tie-out loops on it, maybe at the top and maybe one on each corner, not adding a lot to cost on the tent itself. Now, let's talk, or the tarp itself. Let's talk about cost for a minute. Everybody worries about cost. One of the things I want to talk about in this video real quick is, you know, a long time ago I came up with the term common man, and that common man term has stuck with me, sometimes to the detriment of other things. And I want you to understand that when I say common man, a lot of people confuse common man with not having any money. It's not the same thing. What I mean by common man is, I mean something is good enough quality that I can buy it one time and have it for life. If I have to save up for that investment, that's common sense. And common sense is part of being a common man. Just because I'm common man doesn't mean I have to have a $2 tarp. If I know that something that costs, you know, 10 times that amount of money or 20 times that amount of money is going to last forever, then again, that's common man, because that's common sense, and that's just smart. So let's talk about the cost of this tent really quick, or this tarp real quick, because it is not what some people are going to consider common man. Again, this is Egyptian cotton oilcloth. It's got a high thread count. It's very, very water resistant. The only thing you don't want to do is put an open flame up against it, because it will burn if you do that. But it's very resilient fabric for a lot of good reasons, and it's lightweight. Like I said, this is a big piece of tarp to only weigh 8 pounds for something as heavy duty as it is. You would never get a canvas tarp this big to weigh 8 pounds. It'd be double that probably for heavy canvas. I believe Peter said the cost of this is going to be somewhere between the $300 and $400 range. That is Tent Smith's selling price. This thing will not be available on the Pathfinder School website. It will only be available through tentsmiths.com. It is an order item that you have to order from them, and they make them to order. It's not something they stock on the shelf. Again, there's a lot of pleating, a lot of sewing, a lot of cutting, a lot of reinforcing on this thing. It has like 18 tie outs on the outside. It has 6 toggles, I believe it is, down one side, 6 toggles down the other side with overlapping flaps and loops. It has a reinforced loop at the top for pulling it up. It also has a reinforced pocket in the top of it for putting a pole in if you want to put a pole in there. And then it has 3 or 4 loops on each one of these pleated seams. There are 3 or 4 pull-out loops. I think it's 3 pull-out loops. So there's a lot of work involved in making a tarp like this. And again, it's made in the USA. This is USA quality with USA guarantees. Peter's a great guy to work with. I've never had an issue with him, and I guarantee you, that if you did something to this tarp or you damaged this tarp under normal use, he would say, I'll replace that tarp. I'm not afraid to speak for Peter in saying that because he stands behind his product. He does museum quality work. He does work for museums that are replicating tents and things like that from different periods throughout history. So I know what his quality is. This stuff is the best that you can possibly buy. So you're going to pay more money for that. Okay, folks, I'm Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I thank you for your support. I thank you for your views. I thank you for everything you do for our family, for our friends, for our business, for our school, for all the affiliates of Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School. And we'll be back with another video as soon as we can. Thanks, guys.